Hey, welcome to this Next Steps webinar on Beyond the Porn Phenomenon. And as people are coming in, we want to take a moment just to welcome you. You do have the ability to have your camera off. Looks like I remuted there. Okay, I think I'm back. Okay, if you want to have your camera off or on, up to you. But we would ask that while we present, that you mute yourself. And then towards the end here, we'll have a time for some question and answer as we really dive into how do we take this data that has come out in Beyond the Porn Phenomenon and seeing the ways that men and women, both in the church and outside the church, are struggling with pornography, the impact that has on their faith, their life, and their relationships, and then really looking at how might we use this information to launch groups in our community or in our local church. And so thank you so much for being a part of this webinar. I want to introduce our team that will be presenting today. My name is Nick Stumbo, and I'm the Executive Director for Pure Desire Ministries. I've been a part of the team just over 8 years now. And prior to that, I was in full-time pastoral ministry with the Christian and Missionary Alliance. And I'll share a bit more of my story in a bit here. But first, let me pass it over to Rich Moore. Rich, would you introduce yourself? And then Ashley can go after that.
Yeah, hi everybody. Rich Moore. I've been on staff here almost about 9.5 years, coming on 10 years. But for a lot of you, you may know that I've been with Pure Desire really since the ground floor, so almost 30 years, and um, just so thankful for you guys hopping on today and joining us, and excited for the future of Pure Desire.
And I'm Ashley Jameson. I am also in the groups department with Rich, overseeing the women, and I've been here 9 years. And I have my own betrayal and love and sex addiction story. So I serve out of a heart of wanting to help others because I experienced so much freedom. So I am glad you guys are here today and happy to share a little bit with you.
Yes, well, you're going to get to hear from both of them. Today, I want to take a few minutes and tell you a little bit about the best discipleship strategy that I ever had as a pastor. For the first 10 years of my marriage and the first 8 years of full-time ministry, I was one of the stats in this Barna report that shows that nearly 1 in 5 pastors has an ongoing struggle with pornography. And that was my story. I'd grown up in a wonderful Christian home, godly parents. My dad's a pastor. We have a great relationship to this day, but like so many Christian homes, sexuality was never discussed. I had one sex talk with my dad that was awkward and illuminating, and he did the best he could, but that was the only time I remember talking about sexual things in my godly Christian home. So when I was exposed to pornography as a boy and then got into more adult content as a teenager, I felt like I could not take this to my parents. It wasn't something safe to discuss. I treated it as a deep sin issue that I would confess, and every time promise God that, okay, that was the last time. I would blame it as curiosity or just, I fell back into it, but okay, now it was over and it would be out of my system. I believed, and that pattern continued for 15 years. And as I said, 10 of which I was married, 8 in ministry. And because of that desire to be free, to confess as a way of walking in freedom, even in our engagement, I confessed to my wife to be about my struggles with pornography, told her that I was going to try really hard never to do it again, but that I couldn't promise her that because it felt like I just had never quite figured out the key to be free in a lasting way. And so in our marriage, I continued in a binge purge cycle with pornography. And I was successful enough that I could convince myself I was growing, I was doing better. I was sincere in my faith, sincere about leading our church. I was never trying to live a double life or hide anything. It was always this, man, okay, it happened again, but this is going to be the last time. And then it would continue. And as I would share with my wife and ask for her forgiveness and say, this is why this time it's the last time. After 10 years of that, her confidence in me ever changing had really plummeted to nothing, to the point she was saying, Nick, it's not that I hate you, but I hate the way that this makes me feel. And because I don't know if it's ever going to change, I don't know if I can stay around for this much pain. Well, that was a very frightening thing to hear. As a pastor, typically if your wife leaves you over an issue of pornography, you don't get to be the pastor any longer. And so this issue in my life that I had spent 15 years saying it's not a big deal. It happens once in a while, but I'm almost free. I had spent so much time rationalizing and denying the problem that I was on the verge of losing my wife and my ministry and really everything that I cared about. But even as she said that to me, I didn't know what else to do except build the wall of guardrails higher in my life. Don't use the computer alone. Don't have a smartphone. Don't watch TV alone. Don't go into any kind of bookstore or shopping malls where there might be triggering content alone. Just keep myself safe from the big bad world of pornography out there, which can be some wisdom. But as you might see, the problem with that is nothing on the inside had changed. And I had this deep fear that I was just a moment away from being in the wrong place with the wrong motive and the wrong opportunity, and I could relapse into a behavior that could cost me everything. Well, my wife and I were about 3 months into that new, heightened guardrail stage where I feared we were right on the brink when I was attending a conference for pastors in my denomination. And unbeknownst to me, one of the speakers at that conference was Dr. Ted Roberts, who was the founder of Pure Desire Ministries. And he preached a powerful message about how in the book of Hosea, we were not to see ourselves as Hosea, but we needed to see ourselves as Gomer, who, even though she had experienced faithful love from her husband, had continued to run back to her old lovers. And that as men and women, we were doing that with our sexuality and pornography, that we would leave God's love and run back to former lovers. And God was the Hosea in the story that continued to pursue his people with an unfailing love and woo them, draw them back to himself. It was a beautiful message about God's love. Our district leaders got up and said, if you're a pastor in this room who struggled, and they created some parameters. They said, as long as it doesn't involve anything illegal or physical contact with other people, we want to help you get freedom. We want to work with your board to stay in ministry, and we want to pay for a big chunk of the process. And you would think that I would have been running down the aisle singing, free at last, thank God Almighty, I can be free at last, because it felt like they had made this offer for me. You might think that, but you would be wrong, because I actually sat in my seat with my arms folded and I thought, boy, I hope the pastors in this room who are really struggling are listening to this message, because this sounds like a great opportunity for them. And thus is the nature of denial and rationalization and minimization when we're stuck, is we don't think we need the help. We think it's someone who's one step beyond us. So while I was sitting there making my list of reasons not to get help, thankfully by God's sovereignty, sitting next to me was my wife, who was hearing an answer to 10 years of her prayers, saying, God, please send Nick help to be free, because she believed I wanted it, but didn't know a pathway into it. And so as she's nudging and elbowing me and saying, you're going to go talk to them, right? You're going to go talk to them, right? I said, well, I guess I am now. I wanted to make my wife happy. I wanted to save our marriage. And so I went and met with Dr. Ted Roberts. And my wife and I, for the first time, sat with people who understood the Word of God, understood what pornography and sexual addiction can do in the heart and the mind and the brain, and understood what it was like to be a pastor and not know how to deal with this in a safe way. And they began to walk us through a very intense and intentional process of healing. At the same time, my wife and I were both in groups, myself for the men who struggled, and my wife for the women who had felt betrayed, and were trying to figure out what to trust and how do they relearn a relationship with someone they don't really feel like they know because of all the secrecy and addiction that has taken place. And that year for us was nothing short of transformational, because we learned about an approach to healing that wasn't just trying harder, but was really getting into the deeper issues of why was this behavior happening? What were the unaddressed wounds or trauma points or patterns in my soul that when you're fighting alone, you can't see it, but in a group and with the help of counselors, I was finally able to get my hands around the problem, and with God's grace, understand the steps that actually needed to be taken, not just to have better guardrails, but to actually unpackage the why question and then learn to live differently, to live a life free of pornography. And at the end of that year of counseling and groups, Dr. Ted Roberts said to me, okay, you are ready to take this story back to your church. You're ready to tell your congregation. And I said, No, I'm not. Because my goal was to get healthy as a pastor and to never have to talk about this again. But Dr. Ted Roberts said to me, said, Nick, if you have struggled with this issue like you have, and you've had a wonderful, godly family and all kinds of support around you, how much more do you think men and women in your church might be struggling? And if you don't tell your story, they don't get to tell their story either. But if you will be honest about what God has done in your life, you will open the door for freedom and healing for so many others. And that made a lot of sense to me. And so on a Sunday morning, as I was preaching on Romans 7 and the Apostle Paul wrestling with why do I do what I don't want to do, but thanks be to God who leads us in triumph through Jesus Christ, I was able to say, I believe I can bring some unique perspective to this passage because for 15 years, I have struggled with an addiction to pornography. And you could have heard a pin drop in that room as the pastor says that. I went on to ask for their forgiveness for failing in this area of my life and for failing as a leader. And then I asked for their help to start a ministry for men and for women who struggled with similar issues. And what I really did not anticipate is how significant that ministry would become to the life of our church. Over the next 5 years, we watched over a third of all the men and all the women in our church do groups for men who struggled, for women who struggled, and for women who were feeling betrayed. And it really became a part of the fabric of our church. And one of the things I noticed is that at one point, all of our new leaders, people who were serving on the worship team, people who were signing up to lead a small group, people that were joining the deacons team or being considered for an elder, or even the staff I were hiring, were all people that were coming out of these Pure Desire groups. And it was never the design or the plan, but what was happening is we were seeing how deeply people were stuck in their shame, how this message of shame about their behaviors or what their spouse was doing, and if people knew, what would they think of them, the fears of rejection, the fears of being alone, if people really knew them, when they got into a safe, confidential group, and they could process their whole story and begin to find freedom from that pattern and freedom from that shame, suddenly their hearts and minds were open to what God wanted to do with their life. They were willing to serve. They were willing to be used. And it's not an understatement to say this was doing more to disciple men and women to live like Christ than anything I had ever done. And one of the reasons I see for that is if you think about Genesis chapter 1, God said, let us make man in our image, male and female. He created us in his image. And there's something very unique about our maleness and our femaleness that is very sexual in distinction that really carries the imprint of God in our lives. And I think there is a master strategy of Satan and in a fallen world that the enemy knows if he can get someone dysfunctional or wrapped up in shame at this fundamental level of their sexuality, it impacts everything else downstream of there. It impacts the way we view ourselves, the way we view God, the way we view our relationships, and the way we view our ability to serve or be used by God is being impacted by shame, secrecy, and sin in our hidden sexuality. And yet at the same time, what I saw as a pastor is when men and women found freedom there, when God's grace met them at that deep place in a very good way, everything else was downstream of there. And it began to change their identity, their sense of worth and value and belonging before God. And they also found that in front of their peers, in that confidential, safe, small group, they were fully known. And when they were fully known, they were still being accepted and loved. And that gave them the confidence to come out of darkness into the light and really begin to live there and become really more connected and engaged in the life of our church because there wasn't this voice of shame and condemnation holding them down anymore. And that's one of the gifts that we have seen that addressing this topic can be for men and women in churches. We can teach people all day long how to read their Bible, how to pray, how to worship, how to be a part of a small group. But if there is an unaddressed weight of shame in their soul over unaddressed sexual sin, brokenness, or struggles in their marriage, they may never be able to enter fully into those wonderful activities because of how that voice holds them back. But when we give them the tools to change and the safe group context to change, lives can be transformed. And so we are so convinced that the church is the hope of the world and that the church is the safe place that people need to address brokenness in their sexuality. And that's why Pure Desire has always been about starting groups and helping churches launch this as a ministry within their community. And so we want to talk a little bit about some of those foundations of pure desire. And first, as we get into that, I'd love to have you watch this little video about who we are and what we do as a ministry. So this is Pure Desire Ministries. At Pure Desire, we know that men and women long to have sexual integrity. In order to do that, they need to be free from unwanted sexual behavior. The problem is that men and women in this situation feel stuck and powerless.
We believe all people were created to live a life without sexual brokenness and the effects it can have on their future.
We once felt powerless too, which is why we have developed groups, resources, and Christ-centered counseling to create lasting change.
Pure Desire has helped thousands of churches and hundreds of thousands of men and women around the world break free, heal relationships, and get their lives back.
Based in Oregon, Pure Desire produces group resources for those who are struggling all over the world.
Through an intentional process based on Scripture and fueled by cutting-edge brain science, a Pure Desire group can be a safe place for people to be truly vulnerable, own their story, and find lasting freedom.
Pure Desire also has group resources for men and women married to someone who struggles. The trauma and betrayal someone experiences in this situation can be crippling.
A Pure Desire group can help their spouses find stability and move toward health in their own lives with a community of others walking the same road.
Pure Desire groups are led by men and women just like you, those who have walked this road before and now want to pay their healing forward by helping others.
Pure Desire helps train and equip these leaders to be successful, as well as helping their churches create a sustainable recovery group and leadership development structure.
We believe that hope, healing, and freedom from sexual brokenness can be found through Jesus Christ in a small group environment. This is Pure Desire Ministries. Well, thanks everyone, and appreciate you entering in where you're from. Good to see, man, the variety of locations and even countries here this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. So as you saw in the video, wanted to give just a highlight of what we do or who we really are. What are our core values as a ministry? You see on the screen there that first and foremost, we are focused on equipping the local church. We really believe, as I said, that the church is the hope of the world and that is the best context for people to come and find out they're loved and accepted even in the midst of their brokenness. So one of the things we really try to do is come alongside a church and say, we don't want you to have our groups in your church. We want you to run your groups and use our material and our methodology to help men and women find healing. Because we want to equip you to create a sustainable ministry within your church and community. If we do it, then it's always up to us, and change on a broader scale is limited. But if you do it, the culture of your church can be transformed. Second, we really follow a holistic approach to healing. People need to understand change at a heart level, a head level, and in their hands. So in the hands, those would be the behaviors, the guardrails, the practices that we engage in to live a life free of pornography. Our head is learning to get our thinking right and living in honesty and truth about our past and the steps we're taking for freedom. And then at a heart level, we help equip men and women to understand their story and where their perhaps brokenness or pain in the past has created core beliefs that are lies about their identity, their worth, or their value, and who they are before God. And as we address all three of those areas, the heart, the head, and the hands, that's where we see transformation take place. Third, we're biblically based and clinically informed. In nearly every lesson, people are meditating on the Word of God. They are integrating their story into Scripture and who God says they are. And then what we're doing is utilizing some of the tools that we have learned about brain science or about human behavior that helps us understand some of the passages in the Word of God in new ways to apply them to parts of our story that we maybe haven't understood. And so it's this beautiful combination of seeing what God says in His Word and seeing how God has designed the brain to work and how sin and Satan may have hijacked the goodness of God's purposes in our brain and gotten us caught up in an addictive behavior like pornography. Fourth, we are group-centered. We see that we're wounded in community and we need to be healed in community. We have said that every person would benefit from a Pure Desire group because it's going to put them in touch with their whole story and maybe for the first time give them a context where they can share every piece of that story with other people who are there to understand, accept, and embrace their pattern or their journey towards healing and change. And so at the center of any healing isn't just counseling, but it ultimately is that group setting. And again, seeing that happen in a local community or a local church, we believe is the best setting. And then finally, we have a comprehensive strategy for men and women, both those who are struggling with sexual behavior and those that are hurt and traumatized in the marriage. Far too often, we treat this as a men's issue. And the Beyond the Porn Phenomenon report made it clear, yes, 75% of men are struggling, but 40% of women in the church also would say, I have an unresolved struggle with pornography. And so we have groups for women who are struggling and groups for men who are struggling. But on the other side of the equation, also, there's a spouse. For every person that's struggling with a pattern of porn use, there's a spouse wondering what to do about it, wondering why they're not enough, wondering how they can trust this person. And so we have created support groups for them to find healing and traction as well. And so we really want to help couples heal together. So if you've seen the Beyond the Porn Phenomenon report, you know that we have a problem and that this isn't just something happening out there in the world with those who are a non-believer apart from Christ. This is happening in the church as well. A little bit about the stats that came out in the study. People were asked if their church had a specific plan to help people in this area of pornography or sexual brokenness, and only 10% said that their church had a plan or a ministry. And as we look at the data and this struggle in our world, we believe that 100% of churches could be equipped to run groups. And so if 90% of churches have nothing to offer, that's where we're really passionate to say we want to help see that number change. Among leadership, 67% of pastors say they have a personal history with porn use, and almost 1 in 5, 18%, would say that's a current struggle. And an overwhelming number of pastors, 86%, feel that porn use is common among pastors. One of the things we have seen that just because you get a degree or go to seminary or have been trained to preach the word of God doesn't automatically mean that your sexuality matured and became healthy. That men and women in ministry are still just that. At the end of the day, they are men and they are women who are walking their own journey. And we want to equip them not only to help in their church, but maybe first equip them to find healing and traction in their own story. And then the data that I already shared, 75% of Christian men and 40% of Christian women would report that they are viewing pornography at least occasionally. What that means is that 54% of people in the church would say, I have an ongoing issue with pornography. It's the first time that I'm aware of that a majority of Christians, men and women combined, are saying pornography is a part of my story. And we're asking churches to be a part of the healing for these men and women, because we see the deep impact it has on relationships. This last stat, and then I'm going to hand it over to Rich and Ashley to talk about what we do as a ministry. This is an independent secular law firm, had been doing data on divorces, and they found that 56% of all divorces involved one party having an obsessive interest in pornographic websites. So one of the statements we've made is to say, if we want to cut the divorce rate in half, we should address the problems that are caused by pornography use in the marriage. If we want to help couples heal and have solid footing in their relationship as husbands and wives, we must address brokenness in their sexuality. And the church can do this. It can feel like a big, bad topic that's too difficult to address. But the truth is, if we create the safe community and we have reliable tools like Pure Desire provides, we really can make a significant difference in this area and start a ministry without rewriting how we do church. And so to share more about how we might integrate or use or start these groups, I want to hand it over to Rich and Ashley, who run our groups team and work with hundreds and hundreds of churches every year, and have them talk through Pure Desire's approach to healing.
Thanks, Nick. Yes, Rich and I are so excited to be here. We have been side by side overseeing men's and women's ministry and groups for the last 9 years together. And a lot of it, like Rich mentioned, he's been here since day one. He's been running groups for over 30 years, and myself for over 10. And I was that woman in the church that was desperate for help to heal from my own betrayal, and there was nothing. And so I started it, and Rich and I have been able to put our heads together and just coach many churches through this. And I will just tell you that we have done things wrong, but every time you step out and you just start speaking about this in your church and even offering the space, even if it's not done perfectly, so many people come up and rise up, and you find healing, um, and it's a ripple effect in the family, in the marriage, in the children. It is just incredible what happens when a few brave people are able to step up. And so the solution, as we talked about a little bit already, is coming forward and saying and breaking the isolation and healing in community. And so before I hand it off to Rich to talk a little bit about our mission and vision, I just wanted to encourage you. I did not know, I didn't hear anything in the church about sexual health at all, other than do and don't. And as you all know, that is not enough. And so I didn't even address my own sexual brokenness until a betrayal came out. And that's what really caused me to pause in my marriage because of the pain from the betrayal, to heal from that. But then what was left was I have a history that I haven't processed, and pieces of it are still dictating how I view relationship and even how I view myself in God. And that's why we have different groups for men and women who have been betrayed, and men and women who are struggling. And I'll go into a little bit more of what those different groups are, and how easy it is to go ahead and get them started after Rich shares about our mission and vision.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Nick. Yeah, I didn't think I was going to get emotional, but just hitting this slide here, and then it's very interesting. Nick mentioned the why a couple times early on when he started. Um, this last year has been about the why for me. Why I've led so many groups, why I'm on staff, a lot behind the why. And when we talk about the mission and the vision, providing hope, freedom, and healing through Jesus Christ, I can tell you 30 years ago, suicidal, facing 49 years in prison. I thought I was so far away from Christ that he didn't want to have anything to do with me. Um, that's the why. The pure desire gave me hope, provided freedom, and provided the healing that I needed. Um, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Dr. Ted and Diane, our groups team, the rest of the staff. Um, Jesus put some incredible men and women in my life, and a lot of you on here became really good friends with, and just great relationships. But providing hope, freedom, and healing through Jesus Christ is uh, that sums up my why I'm here. Because if I get to be a part of that with anybody's story, I mean that's why we show up every day. And like Nick said earlier, Pure Desire is biblically based and clinically informed ministry committed to true revival in the church through the healing of the present day epidemic of sexual brokenness. And the mission behind that is to provide hope, freedom, healing, and sexual brokenness and betrayal trauma through Jesus Christ. And the vision is to create transformation in the church by equipping and training churches to develop healing ministries for men, women affected by sexual brokenness. And that's what Ashley, like what she said, what we've been doing for the last 9 years, working with churches and leaders all around the country, all around the world, start this program in their church. And it's been just a real blessing as we've been seeing just the church grow and grow and grow in this area. When we talk about getting groups started, this is the place to come. This is what Ashley and I do on a day in and day out basis, working with churches. We also have our online groups. So our online groups teams on here today, but we're all about starting groups and uh, Pure Desire groups. We believe that change is not possible in isolation. Amen. Thank you for that. Pure Desire, it's a 10-month groups process made up of 6 to 8 people who meet, and these are weekly meetings for about 2 hours to pursue healing. Pure Desire groups support men and women in their recovery and healing by providing a safe, grace-filled place to process their life story by learning how family of origin, traumatic experiences, and wounding messages impact relationships. And again, some of those key things in there, a grace-filled place to process their life story. Again, that's why I'm here. Um, it's just been an incredible journey, and I think that as we continue to help these churches grow and where we're able to use our story to help these churches grow groups and help men and women find hope and healing and freedom is incredible.
Yeah. Thanks, Rich. Okay, so I'll run through a few of the options for groups. I mean, I can't emphasize groups enough. I'm just going to bullet through some of our different resources that we offer, and then hopefully we'll have time for some questions at the end. So, Seven Pillars of Freedom and Unraveled are our two groups, Seven Pillars of Freedom for men and Unraveled for women. This is for the man or woman who recognizes that they have sexual brokenness, unwanted sexual behavior, compulsive sexual behavior, anything ranging from lust, masturbation, pornography, prostitutes, affairs, anything that you want to unpack and figure out why you do what you do and why you keep going back to the things you said you wouldn't return to. And so Unraveled for women, Seven Pillars for men, like Rich said, these are 8 to 10 month groups that you'll do weekly. And then we have Betrayal and Beyond for our spouses. And I encourage, if you are currently a spouse of somebody who struggles, or you were and you're no longer in that relationship due to divorce, death, whatever it may be, I still recommend this group for betrayed spouses. And this will take a partner sensitive, betrayal trauma informed approach to unpacking that. And often what we see and what I experienced is a couple will go through something traumatic, like the discovery of an affair or pornography use, and will go to our church because the Bible is supposed to be our truth on everything, which it is. But when we go to our pastors and maybe they are not as informed about sexual addiction or betrayal trauma, we can be met with really well-meaning answers, such as read your Bible, have you been praying, how's your sex life been, maybe you should do marriage counseling. And then the couple can be thrown into marriage counseling and they start dealing with, I say, like normal marriage issues, money, sex, communication, those kinds of things. But what this is it's an injury, and it's a trauma that needs to be addressed first. And then we go into the regular type marriage counseling. So if you're a pastor or leader, just having a basic knowledge, and I'll get into Sexual Integrity 101 in a minute, of understanding trauma and understanding addiction can do so much for your couples and your individuals that come to you. Just saying, I understand this, I recognize it, I may not be the one to help you, but I can point you in the right direction. And even just telling people that they're brave and coming forward for help. And then we have Authentically You and Living Free. These are our resources for younger single men and women, Living Free for guys, Authentically You for gals. But this is also, again, sexual brokenness, love relationship issues, even sexual anorexia, because we can fear sex if we've had trauma or shame around that. And so anything having to do with wanting to work towards sexual health and sexual integrity and healthy relationships. This is the workbook for those young people. Okay, and then to start groups, the easiest way, and like I said, our whole team has collected these steps based off what we see working for decades and many, many, many hundreds of years of combined experience on our team. Is how we put this together so that you can just take the wheel and use it. You don't have to reinvent it. You don't have to pay the dumb tax, as Dr. Ted says, but we've done it. And so, yes, there's always the human component, but this is what we see work the most efficiently in churches. And so starting off by watching Sexual Integrity 101, which is our video course, this can be a great on-ramp. It actually used to be what we would do as a conference. Our team would travel around all over the country and parts of the world and do this 2-day conference. And what we would hear over and over again is, I wish I would have known this was for men and women. I wish we would have just invited our whole church to this. Wish we would have known it was more than just a conference talking about porn. And so what we did was put it on a video course to make it more accessible. So now those churches that say they wish they would have brought their whole church can actually bring their whole church. And you can just plug and play and use this as an on-ramp. Say, hey, if you're a leader, if you're a grandparent, if you're a wife, if you're a sister, a brother, a neighbor, you don't have to raise your hand and say, I'm struggling with porn or sex. You can just come to learn and be part of the solution. As you heard from the stats that Nick shared, this is a crisis in our church. It's a crisis in our world. And so as Christians, we want to be the safe place for people to feel comfortable to talk about their sexual brokenness. We should be the experts in how God views sexual health. And so just coming and encouraging your church to watch this series. And through that, what you will find is those who are feeling a little draw or stir, saying maybe I have some brokenness or some betrayal trauma that I need to deal with, they'll start to feel that throughout the series. And then you can offer opportunities for them to take their next step. And so the next step into leading groups would be listening to episode 259. We have a great podcast on starting groups. And then have all of your potential leaders. And sometimes remember, your potential leaders might be those individual men and women who actually need the groups first. And you're going to start this kind of quieter pilot group, have them go through the training and work with Rich and I. We'll make sure they're paired with lots of support. They can watch through that group leader training. And here's our sexual integrity 101. And so we can use it as an on-ramp multiple times throughout the year and just wait until you have enough men and women to go through those groups that are closed. Sexual integrity 101. If somebody shows up week 1 and then week 2, they say, hey, my sister-in-law is going through this. Can I bring her? Let this be just an open door, a low entry. Don't force people to talk. Just let them come slip in the back. I will tell you, when I was a single 18-year-old pregnant girl, I found the biggest church I could find in the city, and I went in the back row and I waited until church started so it could be dark, and I just slipped in because I had so much shame. And so I think of this video as make it as easy as possible for people to come and learn. And then from there, we'll put the ones that are serious about their healing and recovery into those closed groups. So we want to offer 30 days free to our Sexual Integrity 101 course. You can check it out. A little try before you buy. You can get in there and see how great it is, even just how applicable it can be, whether you want to take a leadership team through it or just go ahead and show it to your whole church. Rich and I have had a church come to us. They knew nothing about Pure Desire. They just said, hey, we need to start talking about sexual health. And we heard that you guys are the ones that could help us. And we kind of gave them the same rundown and said, start with Sexual Integrity 101. Here's my encouragement to you. Do not be afraid of what's going to bubble to the surface, because what is happening in your church with sexual brokenness is already there. It's already present. It's already tearing up families, causing shame, impacting children, impacting life. It's already there. And so if you show a series and you say, well, what if we get 100 people coming forward? At least it's on the surface now, and we can work with that rather than quietly just eroding these families and lives. So do not be afraid. We will help you. When things bubble to the surface, you can call us and we'll say, okay, we've been here before. We know exactly what to do with this and we'll help you. And so that church that came to Rich and I, they did show this, and they had over 100 men and women come forward. I mean, that's incredible to have 100 men and women in your congregation come forward to say, we want to be part of this solution. So I encourage you to check this out and take advantage of this 30-day offer. And then the last piece I'll talk about before I pass it back to Rich is our group leader training. This is just the nuts and bolts of group. It's a great way to just give people a foundation of the do's and don'ts, things to be cautious of, because all of these groups I shared with you, 7 pillars, betrayal and beyond, unraveled, they're going to have the same basic foundation, group guidelines and best practices for each group. Your job as a leader, as a church staff member, as even just maybe you're the woman like me who needs it and you're afraid to start a little group in your community or church, don't be afraid. Because you don't have to be the expert. We packaged all of the teaching and the digging that people do in the material already. Your only job is just to create that safe environment, keep people on track, and be the bridge between your group and Pure Desire if you need help and you want to reach out. And so the pressure to you can be low. You can show up and say, hey, I need this. This is exactly how I started. I need this group. I'm going to be in this room. And so for those of you who want to join me, we're going to go through this together. I'm going to make sure we start and end on time. I'm going to make sure everybody has equal sharing. And I'm going to make sure that I reach out to Pure Desire if we get stuck on something. And so the group leader training will give you just that basic information you need. But I'm going to just leave you with this encouragement. You can do it. You're just there to facilitate the group, and we are here to help you. And so Rich will now take it and talk about some easy ways to get your church equipped and ready to go.
All right. Thank you, Ashley. Yeah. So we're going to talk about just equipping your church and getting you ready. What I like, Ashley said is don't be afraid. If you're a pastor on here today, um, is to not be afraid to start this. One thing we tell, and I have a lot of conversations, is just because you start a Pure Desire in a group in your church doesn't mean, hey, you signed up, you started a group, and then you're on your own. No, Ashley and I and our groups team and our group advisors, we're there for support, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit too. But we're in this together. It's not all on you. We're here for you. But yeah, let's talk about equipping churches in 3 simple steps. Sign up for the church or individual membership, and I'll talk about those. Complete the group leader training, and as Ashley mentioned, and the sexual integrity 101. And then, excuse me, uh, and then the bottom there, it says churches using both resources can save money and access even more training by becoming a member. A couple things with member, there's 2 different levels. We have the PD Leaders Program. So I want to make sure that sometimes people get confused between the church membership, individual membership, and the PD Leaders Program. Excuse me, the PD Leaders Program is a program specifically for churches and their pastoral staff. And it's so here, PD Leaders Program. Many church leaders who struggle with unwanted sexual behaviors feel they cannot seek help, and that's sad. Pure Desire Ministry partners with the church, denominations, districts, and parachurch organizations to help them address the unspoken reality of sexual addiction within society and the church community. And part of the PD Leaders Program, you'll receive leadership coaching, anonymous access, free crisis consultation, free event registration, PD store discount, and you can visit puredesire.org for the list of all the benefits. And if you're a church running groups, this this is just one of those products to have for your church that makes sense, especially if you're already investing in men and women in your church and your group leaders. Okay, church membership and individual membership. I love this. I'm going to run through, they're both the same. The only thing that's different is the church membership. When you sign up as a church, you'll actually have different levels you can sign up for depending on the need and how many leaders you have. But the benefits are the same. So I'm just going to run through a little bit of the church membership um, first. So what you get in both of them, you do get access to group leader training. You do get access to the sexual integrity 101. And if you're a church, you sign up for you have 5 leaders and you have 5 seats that you're filling. Each of your leaders gets their own access to group leader training. They also get their access to the sexual integrity 101. And some of the benefits of becoming a member, you get live ongoing coaching, training, and support. Monthly live general groups Q&As that Ashley and I do and our groups team. So you have access to us quite frequently. Phone and email support from the Pure Desire groups team, and then also support if needed from our church group advisors. Also, as part of the church membership, you get marketing assets and promotional materials, discounts on resources and events, and those discounts are 15% discount on Pure Desire resources, online groups, and event registrations at the Pure Desire store, and then placement within on our groups map. So if you would like more information on the church membership or individual membership, you can email me and I can go into a little bit more depth. There's also, you can reach out to that. You could go on the website there and you can look in the store and it'll give you more of an in-depth information on that. And if you're ready to get started, simple as giving Ashley and I a call or shooting us an email. Rich at puredesire.org or Ashley J at puredesire.org. Or if you have just general questions at any given time, you can send those to groups at puredesire.org.
Great. Thanks, Rich. Okay, I see Nick's mouth moving, but since I already started talking, I was just going to say, I think we'll have time for questions. But Nick, did you have something else to add?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say, hopefully you can see that Rich and Ashley are awesome at what they do. You heard in their intro, they're very experienced. We've helped many, many churches. And we also know that every situation is a little unique. You know, what about this? What about our denomination believes this? We've got this hurdle to overcome. And we've seen and navigated, I think, almost all of them. It's very rare for us to say, oh, we've never heard that one before, because it's common that there's things we need to think through, and our team would love to help you process that. You can reach out to our team at any time. I mean, that's why we're here. Like I said, we want to be your coach, your advocate, your ally to help you launch groups that you can really take ownership of and run in a sustainable way. And then we're here to help provide all the support that you need. So we do have some time for questions. There was one that came out in the chat, and please, if others have questions, would you drop one in the chat? Or if you'd like to, we could have ask people to unmute and share a question out loud if you would like. But there's one in the chat here, Rich and Ashley. Someone asked how to help break the ice in a small conservative congregation without creating unnecessary shock, so people can feel free to attend groups without stigma. Rich and Ashley, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I'll start with that one because I literally just had this question in the men's only meeting that we did last week. I think breaking the ice in a small conversation, if you're a church or if you want to bring this to your church and this is something that hasn't been talked about yet, maybe have that initial conversation with the pastor and just to kind of feel him out a little bit. And if he's like, yeah, if he's willing to have a conversation at a little bit depth, you could go to the next step. And if he is, one way that is a real good icebreaker for the guys is maybe this individual, and we have this happen a lot because we have a lot of these guys that are men and women that are coming from our online groups, taking it back to their church because they don't have groups. And one way that they've been able to do this successfully for the guys is they've been able to have a conversation with a pastor and he's like, yeah, hey, let's talk about this. How can we do this? They'll call me and I'll say, hey, if you have a men's breakfast coming up where you're talking about like a bunch of different things, Bible study, a bunch of different ministries, you can do this and to share your testimony and then say, hey, if anybody's struggling or wants more information, come talk to me personally. So that's kind of an easy way in where you're not in front of the whole church yet. You're starting small. You probably, if you've listened to the podcast for a long time, you've heard Ashley and I talk about small pilot groups. So before you go in front of the whole congregation and you start and announcing this, maybe you're starting with a very small group. So you're raising up leaders. So when you get to the point where now it's time where the pastor says, yeah, I think we can take this on. Now we've got group leaders, husband and wife, that can get up in front of the church. Maybe he does a series on sexual health, and then now you have a testimony, and then now you have this capacity to take those incoming men and women.
Yeah. Thanks, Rich. I have like 5 ideas because as Nick said, there is not one size fits all. I have been the person in the small church and the person in the big church. So,
Yep.
But really quick, I didn't mention this. Our SI, our Sexual Integrity 101 groups, also known as SI, if I accidentally say that, but our Sexual Integrity 101 groups, we currently have over 40 seats available for our online version of that, our online group. And so that was going to be one of my suggestions for a small church too, is sometimes small churches, people are going to feel more comfortable, or if they're in a public position, a pastor, a doctor, a sheriff, they're going to feel more comfortable going to one of our online groups where it can be more anonymous. And then often they'll bring some kind of pure desire ministry or hope back to the church. And so if that's where you need to start and offer that to your church, then do that. Encourage them to go to an online group. Our Sexual Integrity 101 groups, they're a great starting place, 8 weeks online. We have availability there. The other thing I was going to say is just keep doing what you're doing and be consistent. I started my first group with 2 people, and that group fell apart because I didn't know what I was doing very well. But it started with 2 people, and within 3 years, I had helped start 25 different women's groups, and it was just drudging uphill time. Like Rich said, if there was a men's breakfast or a women's breakfast or a testimony night or a mommy connect or a bulletin. I just took every opportunity, a bathroom flyer. Just make sure you plaster that all over. People like to see faces. They like to know that somebody in their church gets it. And so if you can just give a tiny testimony, which might be more palatable for your pastor and your congregation, of not even a testimony, but just holding up the resource and say, hey, ladies, if you've been hurt by somebody's sexual behavior, past or present, anything, ranging anywhere from lust to pornography or affairs, we have this group. We're going to be working through this. We're going to be sharing our struggles, and we're going to be taking practical steps to move forward in healing. And then I'll just finish by saying, and I've personally experienced that. And so they know that I get it. And I'll say, meet me at this social hour. We'll talk more. You can ask about the book. You can ask me more questions. If that's all your church is comfortable with you doing, take advantage of that. If they're comfortable with you sharing a testimony, take advantage of that. But just continue to put the information out there and be consistent. It's like parenting. They might not be receptive right away, especially if it's a small church, but just continue to drop the information, because what we see is it's usually the people who need it. It's not always people just jumping on the bandwagon to be proactive about things that they don't feel they need. And so if they know the information is out there, they're going to know where to go when they finally get to the point where they're ready for help.
Yeah, and I just wanted to speak to that. If you are a pastor or a leader or someone who gets the microphone on stage, I think one of the key distinctions, and we hear churches make this mistake a lot, is they'll stand up and say, hey, if you've been struggling with this topic, here's the group, here's the info night, here's the time and place, and here's how you fill out the card in front of you, or go talk to this person in the back, without realizing how much shame a person might be stuck in and how much secrecy there might be around this topic. So even if they know they need the group, probably the person they're sitting next to doesn't know they need the group. And if that person knows the date and time and place of that meeting and they say, I'm going, like, wait a minute, why are you going? And suddenly that conversation, the fear of that conversation keeps them from opening up. So I think in a smaller church, in a more conservative church, places where this hasn't been addressed, you want to create opportunities where you're not inviting people who struggle, but you're helping the church embrace this topic and say, we would like everyone to come and learn about sexuality and addiction, because we know our young people are struggling, our kids are having issues, and we all want to be equipped to be a part of the solution and help address this problem. And so if you can create some discipleship opportunities, and that wouldn't be, Rich and Ashley talked about our groups that are 8 to 10 months. Those groups are very specific to people that have identified, I have a struggle and I'm looking to make lasting change. But Sexual Integrity 101 really is designed that it could be an equipping video series that people come just to learn and say, I'm not here for my story, because that's what everybody says. I'm here to help someone else. And that gives us the freedom. That changes husbands and wives from looking at each other like, well, you don't need that group, do you? To actually encouraging each other to go, because they say, oh, we should go to that class because we have kids, because we have teenagers, because we work with young people. We're going to go and learn. And so now when we talk about churches that have had 100, 150 people show up for Sexual Integrity 101, it's not because that church had 150 people struggling with pornography and admitting it. It's because they promoted it as an equipping, teaching, training opportunity, and people had the freedom to come and learn. And then out of there, providing confidential ways that people who do need the longer groups can step into them. And so that's also something you'll hear about in the podcast that they link to, and is really a great reason to start with Sexual Integrity 101 and take advantage of our offer to watch it yourself or to go through the group with us. And then I wanted to mention one other resource coming out soon, and that is a parent training course that we're equipping parents and youth leaders. How do we have the conversations? How do we create the safe environment where our kids and our teenagers know that we're their advocate and their ally in this battle, not their judge or the person they fear punishment from? And I think many parents, without meaning to, have created fear for their kids of, if I mess up in this area, I get punished, I lose things. And so they keep it from their mom and dad, versus creating an environment where the kids know mom and dad are on my side and want to help me along in this journey. And so our parent training course will be coming out in a couple of weeks. And because you've registered for this webinar, you'll hear more information about that as well. Rich and Ashley, we have just a couple of minutes. I do want, for those at the top of the hour that are planning on this being a 1 hour webinar, we'll wrap up. If someone would like to stay, we do have an extra 15 minutes of Q&A time for anyone that would like. I think one of the questions we do get a lot is what if, and you've mentioned a couple of ideas, but if you could both give us a minute or two of your best thoughts on what do I do if my pastor doesn't want groups at our church? What could I do as an individual if our church is not open to this yet?
All right. I'll start. Great question. We get it all the time. And it's probably one of the questions we get the majority, the most of the time. And I wouldn't take that as a no. I tell a lot of guys just to keep that conversation open with the pastor. Just because he says no right now, that doesn't always mean no forever. Now, in some cases it might be, but if the church is adamant and says, nope, we're not going to do it, you can always look and see what's available in your community. Connect with groups in the local community. If you need help finding that, you can contact us. We'll let you know. And if you've been through group and you want to take it to your church and you have a heart to lead and it's just not going to happen, contact us. We would love to have you be one of our online group leaders. You would still be doing the same thing. It's just a different platform. It's not in person, it's online like this. And and the other part is if you have men in your church that are wanting to get together, but the church still just isn't, like Nick said, they're just not engaged and they're not going to support it. We have a lot of groups that meet at a coffee shop, a lot of groups that meet at a little breakfast place in the morning or somewhere off campus. So we could kind of help you walk through some of that, but the first one that we usually go to, especially if somebody's ready to lead and there's just nothing available for them to lead, we still want you, and we can put you in our online group leader pool. There's training for that, so it's not one, again, where you start an online group and you're off on your own. We're a part of that process with you. So Ashley, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, you hit a few. The only other ones I could add, I've done everything from leading in a community center, from my home, online, attending another church. And then my biggest piece of advice, like it's been said, you may not change your pastor's mind, but what I found specifically at my church is one of the pastors, not the lead pastor, was on board and the rest weren't really. Once we ran a couple groups offsite in my home, or even just maybe they gave us a room and there was lots of traction with couples getting healing, I circled back around with the conversation and said, this many couples went through group. This couple took their divorce off the table and renewed their vows. And I was able to show the process worked. And that gave the lead pastor more confidence in having a program that works.
Yeah. And like I said, we have worked with hundreds and hundreds of churches, and every situation is a little different, a little unique, and we would love to talk through what that looks like in your community, your congregation. So reach out to the team. You see our contact information in the chat. Rich and Ashley both take consultation meetings. We are here to help you. We don't want this to be so difficult or too big that you just leave it unaddressed. If you're willing to say, hey, in my church or in my community, I'm gonna carry this torch, but I need help, we say, yes, we're right here with you, and we can provide the guidance needed. And so we hope you'll take advantage of some of these opportunities, whether checking out Sexual Integrity 101, the video series, joining a group to go through it, or checking out the parent training course coming up. We would really value that. So we're at the top of the hour. We want to thank you for coming to the webinar. And what we're going to do is wrap up the official webinar and the recording so that as we share it, it's a 1 hour webinar. But anyone who would like to stay around for bonus time for 15 minutes of extra questions, our team, we are staying on, but this will be the point we end the webinar. So if you've been watching online, if you have been watching the recording, thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to hearing from you about how we can help you take your best next step in launching groups in your church or community.